All right. Hey there, folks. It's Jason Hale again with the Recycling Partnership. I think we're due to start. Welcome to Fighting Contamination webinar. It's the third in our series of 3 webinars this year in Massachusetts, talking about how to tackle contamination and clean up the recycling stream. Really appreciate you joining us. And just a couple of quick housekeeping tips to get us rolling, and then we'll jump into the content. First off, I'm betting you've already sorted this out, but a couple of technical details. Apologies. A couple of technical details. First off, audio. If you can hear me, you've probably sorted this, but you can listen through a phone line or you can listen through your computer. There's a handy and dandy tab on the GoToWebinar screen that will allow you to do one or the other, and so choose wisely. Switch if you care to, and I hope you can hear us. And also, if you have any questions throughout this webinar, please use the question and answer feature that's provided to you by GoToMeeting, and we'll be looking for your questions throughout. Really, during the main pieces of content, we'll just be answering clarifying questions. There are going to be 3 points for specific detailed Q&A, and it'll be at the end of the first section of results presentation, the end of the second section of results presentation, and all that will be clear as we get into it, and then at the end of all of the content as well. We should have plenty of time to answer your questions, so send them as you will, and we'll hit them. We'll be sure to hit them before the end of the event. So with that, let's figure out who we've got out there. Speakers, would you please announce yourselves?
Hi, this is Brooke Nash from the Massachusetts DEP.
Hi, this is Cody with the Recycling Partnership.
Perfect, and I'm Jason Hale, your friendly moderator with the Recycling Partnership. We kept the cast of characters small on this one, just to allow a lot more breathing room for Q&A, and I think you'll enjoy the content we have lined up for you today. First up, just a quick piece on who's talking to you. So Cody and I are with the Recycling Partnership. So we're a national nonprofit that works hand in hand with communities, regions, and states across the country every day to help them get more and higher quality material into the recycling stream. And we have had the opportunity to work in a lot of great places. Here are some of them up on your screen now. And point of fact, we've worked hands-on with 106 community partners just over the last couple of years, and leveraged about $21 million in total recycling investment for additional recovery, and that investment has touched more than 2 million households. And beyond that, just this year, we launched some free open source materials on our website that have been downloaded by communities representing another 10 million households. So we're spreading the good work of better recycling across the whole country, and we're really fortunate that over the last year we've been able to spend a concerted amount of time working with the state as well as a number of communities and haulers and MRFs in Massachusetts, and so that's really the point of today's event. So, fighting contamination. Some of you have dialed into all of our webinars, or we've had a chance to meet you in our travels through Massachusetts, or you've talked to your MACs or the state or whomever, so you're kind of familiar with what we've been up to. But I'm just going to spend just a couple of minutes for the sake of orienting on what we've been up to, and then we'll dive into those results that hopefully you guys are really keen to hear. So first up, contamination. We've been working on it as an organization for a good while, looking at what communities across the country have done to address the problem. And we have some of our own experience as well. We've also worked with local, regional, and national haulers on what they've seen and what they've done to address the problem. And through all of that work and research and our own experiences, we built a model that we feel would be the smartest way for communities to actually address contamination. But we wanted to test it and refine it, and fortunately MassDEP had the exact same vision, so we've been working with them all year. And this year we worked with West Springfield, Holden, Lowell, and Needham to do just that. So the first 3 communities I mentioned, West Springfield, Holden, and Lowell, are all curbside communities, and Needham is a drop-off community. And earlier this year we worked with all of them to roll out the model. And the real questions we were trying to answer in doing so were, could we, in curbside communities, reduce the number of contaminated carts for better targeting? Could we, and rather than having to address an entire community, boil it down to just a more manageable number to really be able to crack down on? And further, could we reduce the overall contamination rate in the community from some on high point that caused a problem down to something that was more reasonable and manageable? And lastly, could we surgically reduce a most problematic contaminant? So if there's some material, some item that's causing the recycling system a lot of problems, could we actually go in and target that one thing and get it down into a more manageable range or eliminate it? And meanwhile, and you can see in the small print in the bottom right, some people express some concerns on, hey, if you're going after these kind of things, you have a chance of potentially negatively affecting set-out rates. And you could negatively affect resident satisfaction in the program. And our belief was, if done right, you wouldn't do that. And for that matter, you could even potentially possibly positively impact those pieces. So that's what we were looking at. And what are these things that we did? In very brief, we boiled down all of our learnings into 4 core tools that needed to be deployed curbside to address contamination. You see them up on your screen: an annual information card, something sturdy to tell people what you want and what you don't in very simple terms; curbside feedback. This is the workhorse of the program. Definitely the most effort goes into this piece, and it's actually getting boots on the ground, going around your most problematic routes, which is probably about 20% of all of your routes, and for 8 collection cycles, tagging carts, looking in carts, looking for problems, giving specific resident feedback. And then 2 more pieces: whatever your top issue is, whatever the biggest problem material in your stream is, addressing that through a mailer and then through some supportive signage or social media or something to back up the message. And that's the most problematic material based on what your MRF has told you. And then backing the whole thing up ideally with some general promotions, just general advertising around recycling to build culture, and some website updates in case anybody has questions about any of that and gets engaged from this stuff. So that's what we did. That's what we did in the curbside communities anyways. And so we did that on 2 routes in Lowell and 2 routes in West Springfield. And further, when we wanted to test, since the workhorse of the program is the curbside feedback, but it's also the most challenging to put in because it takes more staff time, we wanted to test the relative value of that. So we ran in Holden, we ran the program without the curbside feedback, and so it was more of just an outreach campaign, and we measured that for relative effect. And then for drop-off communities, another 4 core tools. They're pretty similar. Top issue signage, so that one problematic material. We liked to use A-frames, and that seemed to be a nice way where you could switch out messages. In-person feedback, so actually having people at the drop-off site on its busiest days, giving a fairly canned speech and interacting with people about the most problematic contaminant. Clear site signage to make sure that people really understood what the site does and doesn't want, and ideally an annual information card, again, so residents have an in-home resource for how to recycle. Add to it some general promotions and website updates, just like with the curbside platform, and that's basically the program. And that's exactly what we did in Needham's drop-off site. So that's what we did in brief. More importantly, though, how did it go? And so for that, I'd like to hand things over to Mr. Cody Marshall.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Can you hear me okay?
Perfectly.
Great. While I'm talking, Jason, check out some settings. We're not getting any questions, so make sure that you might want to double check that the questions, like, we'll be able to see them if they start coming in. So just an FYI.
Okay, thank you. And I've answered a few already, so I know I can see
great.
them. But good to know. Thanks, Cody.
Great. So like Jason said, we wanted to implement some strategy at the curb and at drop-offs, and but obviously Massachusetts, speaking with Brooke, Greg, Janice, and all the Macs, it's just imperative to understand how these resources really work at the curb, and then so we want to do that and then build on them to make them better in the future. So I'm going to talk a little bit about tagging, and what do I mean by tagging? So each community that we worked with, or at least Lowell and West Springfield, their staff went out to the curb, lifted every lid, and then left communication pieces at the cart, meaning they left an oops tag, and either reminded that resident that their stuff was contaminated or rejected the cart. And so the majority of the work we did was rejecting carts, and so when we say tagging, that's what we mean. And so to move forward, Jason, if you could hit the next slide. So like Jason mentioned, a concern, you all have been working on contamination for the last several years. You have work groups up there in the Commonwealth and really have dug in to this issue, which is fantastic. We've learned a lot from talking with a lot of you. And so, but in those discussions, one concern has been, well, we cannot reject carts at the curb. People will, that's a bad service to your residents. We have to make sure we're picking up everything. Or the concern is people will stop recycling if we tag and reject. And so that's one thing we wanted to make sure we checked out through the life of these pilots. And so what you're looking at right here are the 4 different routes. They're each kind of shaded differently. The top table is Lowell, bottom table is West Springfield, and you will see the two different routes. If you just focus in on Lowell, we have kind of this average route and then the poor quality route that we split up into two little groups there, and we tracked how many, the rejection rate, how many tags we left for rejecting carts, and then track the set out rate that same day. And you'll see that it's interventions at the top, and when we say intervention, that means recycling day. That when we tipped the lid and looked in the cart, that was an intervention. So those recycling days equal interventions. So what you can see over time, over the eight recycling day period, and then down in West Springfield, we had 6 interventions, which is 6 different recycling days. Rejection rates were high in the beginning, and then they've tapered off towards the end of the pilot period, while set out rates stayed fairly consistent. And I should say quickly that both Lowell and West Springfield were every other week and full stream in carts. So so you can see those set out rates kind of staying fairly consistent with rejection rates tapering off. And then if you look down on West Springfield, the poor quality route, which is at the bottom, that bottom route there, it was very much a multifamily style community, with 2 to 6 units per property, and the set out rates kind of went up and down along with the number of rejections. So so there's a little bit potentially more work to do in these areas that are more multifamily style, and I can talk about that here in a little bit. If you could hit the next one, Jason. And so this just reiterates here in Lowell the kind of those orange bars are the set out rates staying consistent, while the rejections, while high in the beginning, kind of tapering off and being more consistent towards the end. You can hit the next one to show West Springfield. It's similar trends there. So we can move on. Another thing that we wanted to track was the number of times it takes to fix a household's recycling. And so how many tags does it take? How many times does it take to reject a cart before they fix the problem? So if you look at the top two donut graphs here, you'll see that it's the one on the right is Lowell, one on the left is Lowell, one on the right is West Springfield, and these are like the majority of these homes were very much single-family type styles, and they were the average curbside routes in these communities, not the poorest performing. So looking at Lowell, looking at both of them, 60 to 80% never received a tag. So already a small percentage of your community even need tags that are contaminating and causing problems. If you look at the Lowell route, that orange bar there, 24% of those that were tagged were only tagged once, and then the next time on their recycling day, their recycling was back out and it was fixed. And then you'll see 4 to 7% needed repeat tags before they fixed the problem, and then on both of those routes, roughly 1% either never fixed the problem or the pilot ended before we could figure out what they ended up doing with the recycling. The donut graphs below, I don't even know if they're called donut graphs, that's what I'm calling them. Down below, kind of a similar story, only it took more tagging for individual homes or individual properties before the problem was fixed. And that might be a result, one of our hypotheses is that they're more multifamily, therefore they shared carts, so there was no accountability in some of these properties if they're sharing carts to get that direct feedback that tagging does. So if you see it on that Lowell route, only 13%, and on the West Springfield route, 10% fixed the problem after one tag, and it took 2 and 3 and 4 times to fix the problem, with an average of 5 to 7% of the carts that actually never got fixed on those routes. So kind of interesting to see the differences between the routes, but also the trend that you can really, starting out a program like this, you can really narrow down the population the population that's causing the majority of the problem.
And say, Cody, we've got a couple of fantastic clarifying questions that have just come in. One was a question about could you briefly define what you mean by set out?
Set out is the number of carts that are out at any one time. It often gets confused with participation, so people in the industry kind of like use those two terms interchangeably. Set out means that it's, how can I explain this the best, Jason? Set out is basically the number of carts that you see out on that route that day. And because people don't recycle every single time it's the recycling day, it's always less than participation. So if your set out rate is 60%, your participation is typically 70, 80%, because some people just recycle once a month or something, or every other time that it's their recycling day.
So Cody, would I be correct in saying that if you had a route, like a fairly standard route with 1,000 households on the route, and if just one particular collection day, just random Tuesday, 400 of those households set out containers, since there are 1,000 on the route and there are 400 set out, that the set out rate for that week would be 40%?
Correct.
Okay, but over the course of 4 collection cycles, if all told, say 80% of the households at least set out once, then their participation rate would, in point of fact, be 80%.
That is correct.
Okay, just making sure I follow you. And then there was another fabulous question, which was, what are the parameters for receiving tags? Like if there's just one plastic bag in the recycling, do they get a tag, or does it need to be something a bit more serious than that?
Yeah, it had to be something a little bit more serious, but that was such an important piece of this work. Working with the staff in West Springfield, working at the staff in Lowell, we gathered, like all of us kind of had a meeting before we went out tagging, and looked in carts and discussed, does this look like a serious offense or not? And so because consistency of rejection is crucial. And so typically, if there was just like one little sock or one little loose plastic bag, they didn't get rejected. But if it was a host of problems there on the top with textiles or ropes, cords and plastic bags, material in plastic bags, the cart would get rejected. But it really, you have to set that standard right from the get-go with all the folks that are tipping the lids. And I should also add, Jason, that we only focused on 6 major categories. After talking with the MRFs, we found that they told us what their major contaminants were. So each of the MRFs in Massachusetts kind of shared with us what the major contaminants were, and those typically were tanglers, which are the chains, the ropes, the cords, textiles, clothing and bedding and that type of stuff, scrap metal, recycling in bags, refuse in bags, and what was the 6th one? And bulky scrap metal. Did I already say that one?
I think you said that.
Yeah.
Food?
I think I hit them all.
That's true. Yuck. The yuck is definitely one of them.
Oh, the yuck. Food. Food waste and liquid.
Way to go, Brooke. Perfect. And then last up, Cody, just one more clarifying question on this one, and then we'll bounce on to the next slide. Could you just talk for a moment about how multifamily households were handled? Like if we found contamination at a multifamily household, how do we define multifamily, and how were they notified?
So it was what I'm calling multifamily, what we are calling multifamily, were more than one unit on a property. So for this specific pilot, because these homes had 2 to 6 units on the property, but got collected on the curbside program. So, you know, the truck collecting all the curbside that day, were going down the streets just like they always would, collecting the multifamilies. And those multifamily properties, 2 to 6 units on average, would have carts out at the curb. So they might have 6 carts out at the curb. They might have just 2 carts out of the curb. It really varied. And so to track the cart that was contaminated, we actually looked at the cart number, not the address. And so the cart number is what we tagged, and then we wrote down that number that was rejected.
Okay, perfect. And I'd like to thank the audience for so many great clarifying questions. It's really making this. Really appreciate it. And Cody, why don't we jump to the next slide, which is the last slide of this section before we have a dedicated Q&A piece. So back to you.
Yeah. So one thing that we found through the pilot in working with the communities and the haulers and the MRFs is, you know, one thing that we did want to see is, like, how big is this problem? And for an example, we can look at a community of 25,000 people, roughly 10,000 households. That's about the size of West Springfield, or at least a rough estimate there. And we can kind of talk through what that actually looks like at the curb. So you might be a little worried in your community. I can't go around and lift the lid on absolutely every single cart. That takes too much time. We don't have that many people. But what you end up finding out is it's a smaller population. It's a smaller world that you really have to focus in on. So if you could click through, Jason, I can kind of talk about this. So if you have about 10,000 households, that equals about 10 routes. If there's 1,000 homes per route. And on average, rule of thumb is 20% of those routes might be a major problem that you need to focus in on, but you would need to talk to your MRF about that. So that'd be 2 routes. And then, so you click next, and then, so that would be about 2,000 homes. And then of those 2,000 homes, we talked about set outs, maybe 70% set out at any given time. That's 1,400 carts. Then, as you start your program, like we talked about, tagging will kind of taper off to maybe about 2% of the carts that are out there need tagged. That's 28 tags over time. So you got 28 tags, and then each time we tagged, it took about a minute. And what we mean by this minute is by the time you get to the cart, lift the lid, look at it, then tie a tag on and walk away, it could take about a minute. Therefore, 28 minutes for those 2 routes, weekly every other week. That's just 28 minutes. And then so you're from 10,000 homes, you're only actually looking at 28 households that need some serious intervention to kind of tag maybe on a regular basis on average. So it begins to look a little bit more reasonable to kind of wrap your arms around the issue.
Okay, good deal. So basically, if I'm reading it right, it seems like what you find is after a few weeks of intervention, you're able to specify or better really hone in and target on your tagging. I mean, Cody, Brooke, does that seem right to you guys?
Yes, and you know, I think it's sort of think about the 80-20 rule. You know, that 20% of households are causing 80% of the problem. You still do to do these interventions or tagging. You still do need to mobilize your hauler or the municipal staff that you're going to use to go curbside. But when you break it down like this, it's a lot less overwhelming than you might think of at first pass.
Perfect. Okay. The next next slide is actually. Go ahead.
And
Joe.
Jason, I just want to add to that you really start to, with good communication, when you have good communication with the MRF, you'll start talking about the trucks that are bringing contaminated loads, those trucks coming from specific routes, and you'll really start to narrow down with good partnerships. You can quickly narrow down, and then after a few weeks, you can even talk to the haulers, and they can point to the contaminated carts and where they're having problems because they're seeing it. You have enforcement officers out on the route. You know, just after a few weeks, you're really going to start to hone in on this and narrow down into where the problem is.
Perfect. At this point, I figured we would just pause for a minute or two, or 3 or 4, really, depending on the audience, and just take any additional questions on the tagging piece before we get into the next, which is going to be talking about actual tonnage of contamination. I see one question's already come in. So I think this one's probably for you, Cody. How long did it take to find the 20% problem homes?
Well, that really varies. Each of the routes that we did, it varies. By about the 4th week, or the 4th intervention, things kind of started to normalize. But you really should know by talking with your MRF what trucks are coming in, thus what routes are the major problems. So before we even started the project, the MRFs and the city knew the routes that had the biggest contamination.
Perfect. And kind of honing in even deeper, so how long does it take to work down the curve from how things are at the beginning of the effort for the program down to that, and in your example, 28% continually bad households?
I think I understand the question is that it kind of similar to what we were just talking about. After about 4 weeks, 4 to 5, I should say collection, they were every other week, so I should say 4 to 5 interventions, it starts to normalize itself. It really drops down quick after that first time. Like in West Springfield, on one of the routes, we tagged 50%, or maybe it was a little, tagged 50% of the carts that first time we went out, and it dropped really quickly down to like 20% that next time we went out.
Perfect. Another solid one just came in from someone I'm guessing has had experience with this. I know I have. Any issues with angry residents during the inspection? Folks coming out and kind of showing their ire a little bit.
Yeah, we did a little bit what we kind of expected, nothing more than what we expected. Thankfully in Lowell, both of their employees, they were absolutely fantastic. They're Cambodian, and it's a Cambodian population, so they knew Khmer. So they were actually able to interact with the residents, whether they were happy or whether they were really upset or just inquisitive. That was super helpful. But on the routes on a regular basis, you'd have one person that came out to at least ask questions, and they got, probably through the course of the pilot, they probably got a handful of people kind of yelling that their cart was rejected and they were really upset, and so it took some communication there. So what you would expect in this, but nothing serious. No horror stories.
Yeah, okay. And I think I had heard from some of those partner communities, unless I'm mistaken, that they didn't see any actual uptick from just kind of the normal complaint level, if you will, from communities. Does that line up with kind of your understanding of it, Cody?
Absolutely, yeah.
And let me just ask a question, if you don't mind. It's Brooke.
Please.
Were the folks on these targeted, say, 20% of the routes? Did they get some sort of a heads up that this was going to happen beforehand, that you were going to be coming to the community, or no?
Yes. Yep. They got a direct mail piece, in West Springfield got a robocall.
Okay.
On a specific route.
So that may have then again eliminated some of the what might have been questions, because they'd heard something about this, that folks were going to be out there on the curb looking at recycling.
Yeah, yep. And then not only kind of sharing that with the residents that this is happening, that this is going to continue to happen, but sharing internally with decision makers and elected officials, because they're talking with the community on a regular basis too. You just want to make sure they have a heads up, and we made sure we did that.
Hey, Cody, Cody and Brooke, another good one just came in. So when you're going out and doing these interventions, when you go out the second collection cycle or what have you, were the people out on the route just looking at the carts that had previously had violations, or were they looking at all the carts that were set out?
They were looking at all the carts that set out, and so they printed out their route sheet. We looked at the exact same homes every single collection day, and tipped every single lid of those exact same homes, and their route sheet had the addresses that had the documentation of what happened the week before. And so so they looked in the cart, and then if that was tagged earlier, the 2 weeks before, they would be able to mark whether that specific address was fixed or not. And if it was fixed, they would leave a thank you tag on the cart.
Okay, so for the whole eight collection cycle program, every household on the target routes who set out a cart, that cart was looked at.
Yes, that is correct.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay, and we're going to take one last question on this piece, and then we're going to jump over to the next. And that last question is, you're talking about route sheets, Cody. Just how much prep work was done before the initial engagement on any of the routes?
Yeah, it takes a bit of prep work, and some might say that it's the most important part of the whole pilot and kind of rolling something out like this, or the whole program. What we did was we sat down with the hauler, the MRF, and the community beforehand to just talk about the standard operating procedure moving forward. Kind of everybody signed off on what was going on, kind of planned that the enforcement officers were going to be out there. So the hauler knew, so the driver knew not to tag, or excuse me, the hauler knew not to go into that area until the enforcement officers were done, and then there were a host of other variables to talk through. And then as far as the route sheet, that in some communities that does take a lot of work. So those that kind of everybody automatically gets service and everybody has a cart already, there might not be specific route sheets, so you might have to work with your tax office to get the specific addresses. And then one thing that we did, we got the addresses on the routes, and then we kind of put them in order, odds and evens of how the addresses are on the street, so they could walk down one side of the street and then walk back down the other side, kind of in order of how they went. So it takes a bit of prep. Okay,
well, planning makes perfect. Let's jump on. A few more questions have come in, and we're just going to table them till sort of the next question break, just to get a little more content under our belt. So continuing with Cody leading and Brooke supporting. Cody, next up, tonnage data. Can you talk a little bit about what kind of tonnage data we gathered, and then maybe we can go into some specifics?
Yeah, absolutely. This is an incredibly important part of the study, because when you're doing something like this, when you're looking at contamination, you want to know what you're talking about. We've said contamination for years and years, and this is a problem. Like I said before, you guys have had meetings for years talking about this as an issue and MRFs raising it. So what are we talking about specifically? Let's get down into the weeds and understand what that contamination is. And the idea was, before we went out there with the interventions, we worked with DSM and Ted Siegler, who's kind of like the pushing recovery rate studies in the nation. He does a lot of great work with this, and it's not a waste characterization study as a whole. What it is kind of looking at the recycling cart and the garbage cart at the household level, looking at what recycling is in the recycling cart, what recycling is in the garbage cart. Then we took that a step further and looked at what garbage was in the recycling cart and kind of broke that down. And so we kind of got a baseline on all the routes before, did the intervention for about 3 to 4 months, and then we did the same exact recovery rate in that area to kind of see what the changes were, or what impacts there were, if any. And so
Cody, I'm kind of a storyline learner, so just to be sure that I'm kind of, my brain's capturing what you're describing. So back to our standard 1,000 household route, with, let's just say however many carts are set out, 500, 700, whatever. Ted Siegler's DSM group went out and grabbed a certain representative sample of the garbage and recycling together, and then sorted each of them independently to look at look at the makeup, the makeup, and they did that before we started, and then they did that after all of the interventions. Is that a fair characterization?
The only clarifying piece, yeah, in general, that's correct. He didn't sort each of the carts individually. He took, so each of the routes, he picked up the recycling in one truck, picked up garbage in the next truck, about 40 or 50 homes. Then he would take it back to a facility and sort that pile, not individually at the curb or anything like that. But yes, that's right.
Good man. Okay, thanks for that. And well, let's I guess, can we check out what he did?
Absolutely, and I would add too that you know, there's a lot of data behind this work that we work closely with MassDEP on, and we're going to just show, give you a glimpse at just the contamination stuff. But what it was able to do it helped to drive the tools and the resources that MassDEP is going to make available to communities in Massachusetts. So we're able to hone in, we're able to kind of tweak and fix our strategy depending on what we saw and what worked, maybe what didn't work, what were some of the affirmations or whatever. So this data really drove that stuff that you talked about earlier, Jason. So I just wanted to make sure I added that. But if you're looking at the screen now, the aggregated data for we put Lowell and West Springfield together because they had similar strategies, and you'll see that the contamination rate went from 37% down to 26%. And if you go to the next slide, Jason, you'll see that our targeted material, the reason there was a drop on these routes was our targeted material dropped fairly significantly, and that targeted material was stuff in bags. And when we say stuff in bags, that means garbage in plastic bags or recyclables in plastic bags. When starting this study, we found, when speaking with the MRFs, we were finding that often belts are running too fast. There are tons of tons going through MRFs, and so you're unable to break open those bags to capture those recyclables. So too often, those bags of recyclables end up as contamination. So we wanted to measure both. Through the recovery rate studies, we saw they were a large chunk of the contamination. And so you'll see before intervention, by weight, percent of the contamination by weight was 43% stuff in bags. After the interventions, it went down to about 15% stuff in bags. And then if you go to the next slide, Jason, you'll see the breakdown of the contaminants that we actually saw. So, again, we were focused on specific material with the OOPS tags, but we also kind of looked at some other things. But what we were finding in general, food waste, liquids, there was an all other category, wood and yard waste, textiles, scrap metal, tanglers, which were the ropes and cords and hoses, unacceptable plastics, film, refuse in bags, and recyclables in bags. Those were the categories. And you'll see, like I discussed before, the stuff in bags decreased fairly significantly as a percent of the contamination. Those the kind of the green and the blue bars at the bottom. But the all other category, that 21% to 47%, is this all other category, which is really interesting to us. And it makes up a large chunk of the contamination. This is the weird stuff. That's heavy stuff. It's the construction and demolition, the tire, dirt, and a bag of dirt, just super weird random things, car parts, whatever, that are making up this kind of heavy part of this stream. So when you saw those pie charts earlier that said that it went down to 26%, the majority of that 26% was this all other category. And then you'll see in the other ones, this other plastics category, or just random things, kind of have a little bit of weight and bulk to them. Diapers, for example, were in the kind of all other category, or the other plastics category. Kind of these random things still make up this bulk of contamination, even though our targeted material dropped fairly significantly. So we can go on to Holden next, Jason. And in Holden, if you remember Jason saying we didn't tag carts, so we didn't have people out on routes leaving tags on the cart. We didn't reject any carts. We just did the education piece of the program. So people got stuff in the mail. There were just signs around the neighborhoods. And the contamination rate basically didn't move. It didn't change at all, 23% to 21%. And our hypothesis, our thought is this is most likely because they didn't have that extra communication at the curb, and it takes the communication at the curb as well as the general communication through the mail or signage around the neighborhood that gets the message across. We kind of have to be cautious when saying that because Holden did start out at a different kind of place than Lowell and West Springfield. Their contamination already started out lower at 23%. So they had a kind of a smaller margin to decrease. But if you go to the next one, Jason, you'll see that the percent of the percent of stuff in bags that made up contamination still fell, almost dropped in half. Was cut in half, 40% to 23%, and most of that was garbage in bags that dropped. And if you go to the next one. So you'll see the garbage, the refuse in bags dropped fairly significantly from 24% to 7%, but recyclables in bags stayed at roughly 3 to 4%. And then kind of an interesting trend among all of the routes, the recycling in bags kind of tapered off at about 2 to 3%. So that kind of leaves the question, can it get lower than that for recyclables in bags? And it's just something to kind of leave out there as a question to look at more. But again, you'll see after the interventions, the all other category and the other plastics category made up a large percentage of that 21 or 20% contamination. So those were the curbside routes. We'll jump into the drop-off site, and I should say that each of those curbside routes were a single stream in cards. Now the Needham pilot was a dual stream program and it's a transfer station, and we did the same recovery rate style research with DSM, and we looked in the commingled bottles and cans containers. They have roll-offs, and we looked in the fiber containers, which were roll-offs. And that contamination before intervention was 28%, and it dropped down to 14%. And if you can go to the next one. So as I think we all know, the majority of you operate drop-off sites. The big contaminant is stuff in bags, recyclables in bags and garbage in bags, specifically at a transfer station where there are other places on that same property to get rid of your electronics, your C&D, your garbage, your household hazardous waste. There's actually different locations there, and so people usually don't shove them in that container at a transfer station. So here in Needham, 94% of the contaminants were stuff in bags. After the intervention, it dropped down to 53%. And I should just a clarifier here. We kind of had to make this game time decision with DSM there about whether people would have brought their plastic bag if it was like loosely tied, whether they would drop that dump their material into the container, or if they were going to throw the whole thing into the container. So there might be a little bit of an error right there, but still we found a significant amount of bags dropped from before to after, but still made up about half of the contaminants, and you still have this all other plastics category that kind of still made up the contaminants at the Needham transfer station. So Jason kind of talked about in the beginning, what we wanted to explore, and what we found was, in general, the number of contaminated carts, the overall contamination, and the most problematic contaminant that we targeted trended downward with set-out rates and resident satisfaction remaining steady. At the same time we did all this research, we looked at recovery rates to see if like people kind of just got frustrated and started throwing the more recycling into the garbage. And the result of the recovery rates was inconclusive. One of the routes, it went up quite a bit. Two of the routes, it kind of went down. The other routes stayed the same. So it's inconclusive whether recovery rates are truly affected through this strategy. But fairly consistently, I think we can feel pretty safe that they thankfully didn't drop dramatically on all the routes or anything like that. So in general, these are the results that drove our resources to make sure we tightened up the resources that are provided to the communities in Massachusetts. And so, Jason, we can talk any other details that you might want to talk about.
Yeah, I think that's. Go ahead, Brooke. Do you have any points to make on all that?
I was just going to add that we think what we're going to be showing you after we take your questions are talking a little bit more about is this we're calling increasing quality or IQ kit. And what we think we've learned from these pilots is that this is an iterative process that it's by no means a magic bullet. We wish it was, that behavior change takes time, but we think this strategy of really focusing, doing this direct focused intervention, sort of direct feedback at the curb is really critical, and that when added with traditional outreach and education, providing people with the information they need about how and what to recycle, that's kind of the secret sauce, I guess, if you will, what we think makes this different. It's a departure from what we have historically most of us done, which is rely on general outreach tools and venues to communicate with our residents. So anyway, we think that we're recognizing that there's an investment in this approach. It does require some resources, but that the payoffs can potentially be pretty big, and that we hope that over time this will be sort of a best practices approach that will be adopted by more and more Massachusetts municipalities. But we will talk about that in a little while. Thank you.
Yeah, and I would add to what Brooke is saying that through this process, a couple of successes that came out of this that I didn't really think about before we started. A success was just really great relationship building with the MRFs, Waste Management, Casella, Harvey, and the haulers like Republic Services and Waste Management and Casella. They were just really fantastic to work with, and the communities and the haulers kind of really started to talk more through this process, and kind of learning how both parties can benefit from this work is a success from this. And then also just identifying contamination. One thing that I wasn't really thinking about when we first started was this kind of random heavy stuff still making up a bulk of the weight, and can we stop that from happening? Can we stop the person from putting an engine block in the bottom of their cart? I don't know, but we really kind of looked at the breakdown of contamination, and to Brooke's point, this is an iterative process that we'll build on from here, and so I'm excited about that.
Good. Well, important point. Brooke, later maybe you can help Cody say iterative.
We'll work on that.
That seems right. And outside of that, folks, we do have a couple minutes scheduled here. If you would like to throw a question specific to the tonnage, I know it's a lot. And point of fact, I think this might be some of the best, if not the best, tonnage data around the makeup of the contamination stream that exists. So big kudos to MassDEP for funding it, and for Ted Siegler, DSM, for actually doing the legwork to gather the data and present it. So I know it's a lot to swallow, though. It's quite a bit to take in. But I'm just going to pause for a quick second, see if there's any questions that are going to come in beyond what already has, and then we'll jump into the next phase, which is sort of what does all this mean for you? How can you get your hands on these tools? What's phase 2 look like now that the pilots are done? And let's see, we're having something come on in just now. So there is a question, and we didn't really get into the topic of expense on this. We just talked more on results, but a question has come in: Did the savings in the contamination, cost of the contamination, cover the cost of the enforcement? Cody, I'm going to punt that over to you.
You would punt that to me.
I would. I feel really good about that.
This is a conversation that needs to continue to happen, right? Massachusetts is one place that has some of the best dialogue about this topic and it needs to continue, because frankly, folks that are getting fined, the cost to the MRF, the cost to the hauler, the cost to the local government, it's all different. And so in West Springfield, there wasn't anybody dedicated. They didn't have an enforcement officer, so they pulled some people from other parts of their work in the Public Works Department to do this in the morning on these routes. And then in Lowell, they actually, through a grant, were able to hire a temp employee to go along with their full-time person, enforcement officer, to do this work. So the time, it's not a straightforward answer, because we don't know the full cost specifically to the MRF, the full cost to these communities, if they're getting fined or not, and if an employee existed there before or not. So it's
Jason,
kind of a deeper question.
And yeah, let me just weigh in on that a little bit too. Just to clarify that we did not set out to answer that question. That was not one of the metrics we used. Would there be an equation, a neat equation, that if you did this plus this, it would balance out the other side? So I think that's an important distinction. I think what we've learned from this is that it's about building relationships and a recycling culture in the community, where people are understanding that that there are right ways to do it and there are ways that are not acceptable. And up until now, because communities and MassDEP we haven't looked at this, every time our hauler picks up a cart and it's got a bowling ball in it or a bunch of food waste, and the cart gets tipped into the recyclables and goes away, we're reinforcing that message to the resident that it's okay to do that. It's okay. We actually learned from the market research we did, statewide survey that we hired a market research firm to do in summer of 2015, that Massachusetts residents are extremely confident that they know what can go in the recycling and what can't, and it's a very mainstream activity. But we tested that also in the same survey and found out that, in fact, very few really do understand the rules. So we're working on trying to revisit this whole idea of how do you get people to understand that that recycling does require a little bit more thought, and that this is a worthwhile effort because all of us have invested money in building this system, whether it's the private company that's built the MRF, or it's the municipality that has paid for the carts and has hired the hauler, or it's the hauler that's bought the trucks. We're kind of all in this together, and so we're trying to approach this as with a unified front.
Excellent clarity on that piece, for sure. So let's jump on. We've got a few other questions we can hit on this piece, and then we'll move on to kind of the last phase of content after that. So one question, Cody, this one I think you could probably tackle. It's on the contamination breakdown slides. There's more detailed stacked bar chart slides. Was that showing recycling and trash, or was that just what was in the recycling containers?
The percent of contamination in the recycling container.
Okay, so just total percentage before, total percentage after, what the makeup was.
Of contamination only, correct.
Right, gotcha. Okay, another solid one was, let's see, did the MRF recognize, did the MRF have anything to say about the change? Did we get any feedback from them as of yet on the significance of the change?
I think the MRFs are really encouraged. We're going to be following up with them and having discussions with them. You know, the contamination is fairly high on these routes. So, but it highlights it highlights where we got to go and what we got to work on. So I think there's a lot of encouragement there.
Okay, super. And last up, and I don't know if we have this data or not, but did the Needham intervention, the drop-off site intervention, have any particular impact on overall disposal or overall recycling tonnages? You know, like a change from beginning to end that we could possibly attribute to this program, or do we have that data at this point?
We didn't look at garbage data at the transfer station. The recycling tonnage was roughly the same. It wasn't very dramatic before. There wasn't a dramatic difference before and after. And then hopefully here soon we're going to get some participation data. What I mean by participation is number of cars coming in. So we have that before, and we're hoping to get that after.
Perfect. Okay. Very insightful questions. Thanks for the answers. And if you have more questions, please keep them flowing in just to make sure we hit the rest of the content in our remaining 19 minutes. We're going to go ahead and kick through our last few content slides, and then we'll have question and answer up to the buzzer. So please keep your questions coming in. So Brooke referenced this earlier. So all of these tools, resources, approach, and even the results are being compiled into what we're calling a recycling IQ kit. IQ for improved quality, also because we hope it's smart. And so that is in the final editing phase right now, and it'll be out and available to you all in November. And it's for curbside programs, for drop-off programs, single stream, dual stream, what have you. Everything that we've been talking about all year. And basically it's boiled down in stepwise to be as straightforward as we could make it, so that you can follow along with the key tasks and timelines. There are basically 5 steps and 4 core tools, and a host of supporting resources around that to help you deploy them well, track things well, train well, and run a solid program. So look for that in the coming weeks. So you'll have a stepwise guide, including lots of links to supplemental pieces in this kind of program. I'm sure you would imagine one key piece of that is going to be the actual artwork files and what have you for signage and mailers and all those communications tools and oops cards and thank you cards and all the things that we've mentioned today. And you might say, boy, I'm not a graphic designer though. Some of the files will actually be in 2 formats. One for people who are designers to take a design file and do their fancy design magic on. But then for normal people who aren't designers, there will be a version that you can simply drop in a phone number and a logo and a website for your community, and on you go. So that will be available, but I think we all know that it's not just the pretty campaigns that get the job done. We need to do more. We need to do the boots on the ground, the operational work, and so there'll be resources to support that side of things too. So suggested standard operating procedures for how people operate out at the curb when they're looking into carts and figuring out whether to reject them and how to reject them and how to track them and that sort of thing. There are a couple of videos, training videos for enforcement staff on the street and for drivers on how to engage in this program. And there are things like suggested formats for how you communicate between community and MRF to in a simple, streamlined way, in a realistic way, talk about the levels of contamination and how they might be changing and where they might be coming from. So all of those kind of tools as well will be available in this kit, which again will be made available in November. So be looking for more on that for sure. If you are listening to my voice right now, that means I have your email address because you came into the webinar, which means you'll definitely get an email when that is posted. And beyond that, MassDEP will be releasing links to these kits as well. And that felt like a really nice segue into resources and support that MassDEP might have to offer on this. So Brooke, could you take us home with that?
Sure, I would love to. So as Jason mentioned, this is going to be available to any community that wants to use it, or I should say even to use parts of it. If you feel like all you need is some artwork, and you can grab that. This is all being offered as open source, and it will be available online. In addition to that, though, we're also looking for, and we'll be soliciting from interest from somewhere between 4 and 7 municipalities who would like to dive a little deeper and implement the practices in the IQ kit over the next year. So what will that look like? Well, essentially we are hoping that each MAC district will have a community that wants to step up and do this. We would, our objective basically in doing this would be to sort of, we've done our 4 pilots, let's get a little more experience and figure out how we can most efficiently deliver this type of assistance to more municipalities than just the, say 10 we will have done in a couple of years. How are we really going to fan out and sort of get smarter and help people access and utilize the resources so that you can all try to improve your recycling program. Again, the toolkit is going to be available to anyone who wants to use it, and there are certainly no restrictions on how many municipalities can use it per year. But in this, the next phase we're calling, where we'll work with, let's call it 5 or 6 municipalities. A key part of our selection criteria will be to what extent the municipality has buy-in from your elected officials and your municipal managers to actually try and make some impact out on the front lines. To what extent can you provide on-the-ground resources? Do you have a part-time enforcement staff person, or do you have somebody else in the department that could be mobilized to help during the intensive outreach periods? And are you ready to take action? Obviously, leaving carts at the curb and saying, no, we're not going to collect them is going to ruffle some feathers, but we've shown in the communities that we worked in for the pilots that it really works. It's really the best way to send the message. So that will be a key part of what we're looking at as we evaluate municipalities and then select folks to work on the next level. So what will you get if you're one of those communities? What sort of assistance will you receive? DEP would print the collateral material, so that means the OOPS tags or the mailers, the flyers to put on a sandwich board, that sort of stuff. You would also get planning assistance, and this would be primarily from your MAC, but would also include the recycling partnership folks, Jason and Cody, who ran the pilots. What might that look like? That might be involve, say, having a kickoff meeting with your MRF and your hauler and your municipal officials to talk about sort of the overall game plan and make sure that you've got buy-in from all of the stakeholders. And then lastly, what we would provide would be funds to cover some portion of the implementation and the operations part of the work, so that if you need money to supplement sort of the boots on the ground, finding folks to do the tagging and giving the feedback, that will be part of the grant. The amount of assistance would obviously be scaled with the size of the community and the number of households that you serve. And there will be a pretty straightforward application process. Essentially, it's an assessment toolkit where you would answer questions if you're interested, and that would help us to figure out whether you're a good candidate for this, and would make sense for us to work with you. So we anticipate that process kicking off right around the first of the year. Again, the toolkit's will be available, it's 99% there. It'll be available probably in a couple weeks, I would say early November. We will be soliciting 5 to 7 communities starting first of the year to want to dive in a little deeper and get some more assistance on taking this on. I'm happy to answer questions.
Well, that's perfect, and that's another great segue to our last slide. So please stream your questions on in. We do have a good 10 minutes left on deck. We don't have to use it all, but I do see one that has come in, and so for either Brooke or Janice, or who we work with. Brooke or Cody. Has the reduction in contamination in the pilot communities continued? Is the question.
Hey, I can talk about that. I think it's a great question that we would love to know, and hopefully here we'll have a follow-up conversation with Lowell, West Springfield, and Holden. We don't have we're not going to go out again with a recovery rate study or tagging, which might be a good idea. There's no plans for that yet, but talking with them is something we plan to do.
And I do think, we had a good conversation about this very question is, is this one of these shot in the dark, you go out, you do it, you wipe your hands and walk away? And I think we feel pretty comfortable saying that the answer is no. That just the same way that we really can never take our eyes off the need to educate people, to continue to provide updates and information and remind people how to recycle, that this will have to be incorporated into ongoing practices. And that's where we see this really being a partnership between municipalities and their hauler, since most municipalities are not operating their program with in-house crew. That a partnership with their haulers, it's a sustainable model, that you're not asking haulers to add additional staff, and for most of your routes you're talking about very targeted, specific feedback points, so that one of the examples is, well, how do you know something's contaminated? Well, one clue would be when a driver goes to pull the cart from the curb and hook it onto the tipping arm in a semi-automated program. If you can pretty much tell if that cart weighs a ton, feels like there's a bunch of bowling balls in it, that's a good tip. Like, that's probably a cart to tip the lid, leave a tag. So again, there's many different ways to approach this, but we do think that this is not just a one-off. That it's going to be sort of a new way of doing business, interacting with your constituents, if you will, the residents that are participating in your recycling program, by letting them know, hey, good job, or oops, problem, we want to help you fix that.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you actually touched on it like that. That if you just do this type of a program without a regular maintenance of doing something with your hauler or enforcement officers at the curb, it's going to fall flat and it's going to be inefficient and more expensive than it needs to be. There needs to be something that goes on regularly on every single route, even if it's light touch. You got to do something to exactly what you said, Brooke. So I'm glad you said that.
Well done, guys. Well done. We do have a slew of more questions that have just popped in. Another one in. I think I'm actually going to take it just for fun. So, have you tied this effort to not only state but national efforts, so that we're all working towards the same goals and common messaging? And we are indeed working toward that. So we're working with other groups that communicate regionally and nationally. We actively talk to those folks to try and figure out what kind of common languages, whether it's how to recycle kind of languages, or common languages around plastics, or just what. Not to say there has to be one single exact language, but we are working towards a lot of commonalities around best practices and best principles for clean, simple language that is from the resident perspective as opposed to from the professional recycler perspective. So that's a super solid question. Several questions came in from, we've got a nice large drop-off contingent, I think, on the call today, wondering, about the tools, resources, whatnot available for drop-off communities who are interested in diving deeply into this. Cody, would you care to take that one? Just kind of what a summation of what kind of tools those drop-off communities can look for.
I was on mute. Yeah, so basically what was done in Needham was clear signage. So there's design for clear signage on the containers. These were roll-offs. Some put them right on the roll-offs. Some put them on railings beside the roll-offs. Whatever that might be, there's design for that. Super clear signage. Then there's signage for temporary signs. As you can see on the screen, there's kind of that sandwich board sign that that tackles and gets at your main issue. That main issue being stuff in bags. Then there's material for either direct mail or to hand out at the facility. So we had temporary staff at the facility handing out information and having interactions with the residents as they were delivering their recyclables. And so you can kind of see from this slide is temporary signage for your roll-off, direct mail, and then info cards to have. And one thing that might be nice, if you don't have the person right there at your facility to hand stuff over, put one of those little plastic brochure things out that's weatherproof. Put some info cards in that, so people that need a little bit more information to take information back to their house can grab it and go. So there's a lot of different ways you can use these resources, but that's what we did at the drop-offs that are available to you.
Let me just jump in with one more thing, too, to say that there will actually be 2 different versions of the IQ kit, one for drop-off communities and one for curbside communities.
Well played all. Sounds wonderful. And don't forget, the nice thing about the drop-off relative to the curbside is you have the people coming to you. And so you have a fairly captive audience and can reach them much more efficiently than sending people out on routes. And so I think you can see that reflected in the effort, which is great. So in a lot of ways, you drop-off communities out there have a leg up. Okay, so we have probably more questions than time, which is great to see the interest. Thanks, folks. Another one would be, Cody, I know that in the kit it mentions engaging the hauler. I know these folks haven't seen the kit yet, but it does mention engaging the hauler on some pieces of this for the curbside communities. Can you just talk a little bit about the hauler's role as envisioned in this specific program?
Yeah, this specific program, you'll have an enforcement officer out on the street that's tipping lids. It could be a new person that you hire. It could be somebody that kind of just does this in the morning that has a different job. The hauler is going to need to know this is happening, and because they're going to need to know to avoid that route at that time, that piece of the route at that time, so the enforcement officer can go around. And then they need to know not to collect the carts that are tagged. And then it would really be great if they monitored material as it was, if it's fully automated, as it was dropping into into the body of their truck, either their camera, if it's a Corrado can in the front where they can see material dropping in. If they see stuff on the bottom, they could participate with you and the enforcement officer to tag and kind of meet in the middle for, so the city can put up some resources and time, and then the hauler provides a little bit of time for you to truly get at the problem together.
Perfect. I'm going to take one last question, and Cody, we've only got a minute and a half left, and Brooke, so let's see if we can just tackle it really quickly and then say our fond farewells until next time. And it's a great question to end on. Beyond this eight collection cycle or 10-week at drop-off site, very intensive effort. What does program maintenance look like? Because obviously communities probably can't keep up this level of effort for forever. So what does regular maintenance look like after this piece is over and the contamination rate is back in check?
Anytime a hauler sees material contamination poking out of the cart or the bin, they get out and tag. Anytime they see it in the camera dropping out, they get out and tag. And then doing random audits with enforcement officers or just staff in your community to kind of just go around and check. Maybe on a street or a route, just randomly check the driver randomly checking 10 or 20 houses, or an enforcement officer doing that. Working together, city and hauler, on a regular basis to do a minimum light touch of looking in the carts. If it's semi-automated, I would say always tip the lid as you're dragging it to the truck.
Okay.
And I would add to that just really quickly that communication is key, and so if you are not in the habit of speaking regularly with your haulers, either the route supervisor or maybe it's the district person, if you're not on a first name basis with them, it's probably a good idea to start building that relationship. The communities that are already doing this kind of work are speaking, you know, it might even be weekly with their hauler, or they know the names of the drivers in their community. So again, it's sort of about relationship building, so that the hauler knows that you're counting on them, and that this is a team effort, and everybody's got to do some of the work.
Well said, and that's we couldn't end on a better note. So let's pull the plug there. I'd like to thank our speakers very much, Brooke Nash, Cody Marshall, for sharing their insights and experience. That was fantastic, and really, especially thank you guys who dialed in with so many engaging questions. We really appreciate it. We look forward to working with you more in 2017. So thanks very much, all. Have a great day.